So welcome everybody to our My STEM Future speaker series. It's the first one for the summer, which we're really excited about having you here. So today's speaker is Mariya, who is, oops, that was a bit too vigorous with my clicking, is Mariya Chhatriwala, who's going to be talking to you about her career to date. So really, Mariya's got a lovely career path, starting in science, and now she's doing technology transfer as a business development manager, which is really quite cool, and she'll explain what all that means. But before we get to hear from Mariya, let's just sort of tell you, if you've not used Zoom webinar before, you should be able to see a couple of things on your bottom of your screen. So if you can see chat, so you can use that to chat to us, or if you've got a if you've got any questions. If that doesn't work, you have also got the Q&A, so we can monitor the Q&A for any questions that you want to ask, and we will ask them for you. We can't see you or hear you, so these are the main ways that you can keep in contact with us, because it is on webinar. And also just to say that obviously we have had previous talks as well, and if you haven't seen any of them before, if you just go to www.mystemfuture.org, you can catch up with all previous talks, and we are recording this, so we will also post this talk after the event as well. So that is all I need to say about today. I'm going to hand over to Mariya now, so there'll be a quick change of slides.
Hi everyone, as Fran said, also a little quick with the changing slide button there. But anyways, as Fran said, my name is Mariya, and I am a business development manager at the Sanger Institute. And thanks for taking the time to come here today and listen a bit about my journey into this particular position. So, one slide. Oh, there we go. So before I tell you, there's a bit of a time. So I'll start by telling you a little bit about myself. I was born in Mumbai, India, and at the age of 3 months, so pretty much when I was born, I moved to a completely different country, which is where I ended up growing up. And that country is Saudi Arabia. My father, like many people in Saudi Arabia at the time, worked for an oil company, Saudi Aramco in his case. And I've always been interested in science for as long as I can remember. And, you know, seldom accepted statements that didn't come with logical explanations or evidence, much to the chagrin of my parents. But I think it set me up really well for a career in science. And then at the age of 15, after being in Saudi Arabia for 15 years, I traveled to the other side of the world to continue my education at the Taft School, which is a private boarding school in the state of Connecticut in the US. So one of the reasons this happened was because in Saudi Arabia at the time, you had a lot of children of expats living there, and there weren't many schools after a certain age. So companies would often pay to send their employees' children off to boarding school, and this is what happened to me. So anyways, when I got to Taft, I struggled a bit to fit in socially at times. Most of the students there came from very privileged backgrounds, and so it was a little bit hard adjusting to that kind of, I guess, social environment. But, you know, I made a lot of good friends, and I received a really fantastic education, and for that, I will be forever grateful. So once I finished high school, I ended up moving to Indiana University in Bloomington in the state of Indiana. And while there, I majored in biochemistry, but also minored in French and took classes in totally unrelated subjects as diverse as English literature and music theory. And so I received a really, really well-rounded education, I guess you could say. And then once I was done with my biochemistry degree there, I ended up applying for PhD programs and got into the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where I ended up specializing in protein biochemistry and structural biology. And in between experiments, I also did a lot of rock climbing, amongst other things. We were really close to the mountains, so I took advantage of that. I think it's really important to have interests outside of what you do to keep your sanity. And so, yeah, that's what I did. And then after completing my PhD, in biochemistry, I decided I wanted to switch fields in science and worked with what was then sort of the up and coming field of stem cells. And that's what brought me here to Cambridge. So I moved to Cambridge and ended up working in a postdoc position for a little while. And then I did that for about 5 years and then moved to the Wellcome Sanger Institute, where I was a staff scientist for a bit, before transitioning into the translation office, where I work as a business development manager. And in my role, I work with the scientists on campus in the field of genomics and biodata, finding solutions or services in that area which may improve healthcare and biodiversity. So I'm a part of the technology translation team at the Sanger, and while I no longer do bench science anymore, I'm still quite close to the science. And I really try and help the people at Sanger doing the research, the scientists in the lab, bring their research closer to a product which a company or an NGO, for example, could take and then use. And we'll see some examples of this later on. So just a few definitions before we go on for those of you that aren't completely familiar with the field of genomics and biodata. So genomics specifically is the study of all of a person's genes, the genome abbreviated, and including the interactions of those genes with each other and also the person's environment. Ooh, didn't mean to do that. Sorry. Okay. Biodata is the study of biological data at scale, and that means taking thousands of pieces of information, often millions of pieces of information, and then often putting it together in something like a database that allows you to look for patterns which can indicate a possible discovery. One example of this is the 100,000 Genomes project, which looked at the genomes of 100,000 people with rare diseases and their families to better understand the cause of this particular rare disease. And it's only when you have the data at scale that you can really begin to see these patterns, which is one of the reasons that the work done at the Sanger is so groundbreaking in many ways. So when combined, genomics and biodata help us address multiple healthcare and evolutionary challenges. This isn't an exhaustive list, but it includes things like finding treatments to lethal diseases such as cancer. We can use it to carry out genomic surveillance of pathogenic diseases such as malaria. We can also track the evolution of potentially pathogenic bacteria. And then recently, the Sanger has started to delve into something called the Tree of Life, where it's looking at the genomes of the various species found in the United Kingdom. And one of the potential uses of this could be the discovery of novel enzymes and molecules with useful functions, such as proteins that allow adaptation to hotter climates. So I'd like to ask you a question now. What other challenges do you think genomics and biodata can help us solve? Go ahead and add them to the chat. I'll give you a minute or so to do that. In any case, there are loads. So let's move on now. And feel free to continue adding as I go through my presentation. So now I'd like to give you a brief synopsis of how we end up taking research from the lab into the real world. So the most important thing I will do is talk to the scientists at the Sanger to assess the viability of their ideas and the potential impact of their research. I also explore the legal and intellectual property framework around the commercialization of a product. This often means talking to our legal team at the Sanger to see if the research can legally be turned into a product which a third company can buy, or if we need to do things like get licenses to third-party intellectual property. That means So third-party intellectual property is another way of saying if a product needs to use something that somebody else has invented, we need to make sure that we have the correct permissions and such in place to use that other person's invention. And then I also do things like consider whether or not we can spin a company out, or, based on the work that's being done. I'll do things like help prepare business plans for possible spin outs. I'll work with patent attorneys to make sure that our work is protected, so that we have our own IP or intellectual property. And I often talk to industry parties at big events to see if they're interested in our products, and also to explore ways in which we might collaborate. So what skills do you think I need in my daily job? I think Cindy or Fran will put up a poll now, so have a go at the poll.
So if you can't see the poll, just in case, some of the options are intellectual property, negotiation skills, pharma knowledge, so knowledge of the pharmaceutical industry, people skills and communication, cancer biology, immunotherapeutics, drug development, contract law, business development and market knowledge, and bioinformatics. So if you can't see the poll, do put those in the chat as well. Any ideas? Any at all? Go on, be brave.
I think we've got 6 responses so far. So someone say, or 7 actually. Intellectual property, negotiation skills and marketing, pharma knowledge, people skills and communication, contract law, business development and market knowledge, and bioinformatics.
Okay, those are all really good answers. So what I will do is I will go to my next slide, and surprise, I need all of the ones that have been listed, really. So the job that I do involves blending all of these different areas of knowledge together. So I wouldn't say that I'm an expert in any of them, but I know enough to know when I need to ask more questions, find the information that I need, and integrate the information that I get. And so to summarize, I need business development skills, so things like negotiation skills, marketing skills, knowledge of contract law, that sort of thing. I also need to be able to communicate well with a range of people, so definitely communication and people skills. And I need a fairly comprehensive scientific knowledge base, especially in the fields of genomics and biodata, but also things like cancer biology and immunology, all of the stuff that the Sanger tends to work on. And when I don't know something, I have the ability to go to papers and read more about it and learn about it. So a lot of my job involves keeping on top of the science so that I am able to communicate with the scientists on campus in a way that is beneficial to both of us, because you don't want them dumbing down what they're saying for you. And because it's such a diverse range of activities, I'm never really bored doing what I do. It's always quite interesting and new and different every day. So I wanted to put up this slide to give you a schematic of the process that most products end up going through. So this is a diagram that was published on Marquette's website, but we do something that's very similar. So basically, scientists will carry out research and discovery. They'll disclose an invention to us. We will then evaluate it, potentially file on intellectual property, go through some sort of marketing phase where we negotiate a license with a potential partner, et cetera. And then when it's finally commercialized, we hope to see both benefit society as well as revenue that comes back to us. But really, the Sanger is focused on having its science create societal benefit. And so my part of the job generally focuses on the first half of that process, everything from researching the science up to sort of negotiating with various partners that might be interested in taking it forward. And so we've made things possible like vaccines, new medicines, and then tools for better genome sequencing and diagnosis, to name a few. So I've got another question for you, and I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on this. The work we do at the Sanger obviously has the potential to create really interesting new therapies and really create societal benefit, as I said. So why would we not just give all of this away for free? And I'll give you a minute or two to see why you think that might be the case. I've had recover the cost of research. That is a good one, yes. Any other thoughts? Okay. Well, I'll list some of my thoughts. Oh, yes, incentive for further development. That is also very true. Okay. Stop companies using it. In a way, yes, that's part of it, but we don't necessarily want to stop companies from using it, but we'd want to stop companies from potentially using it in a way that may be detrimental. If you have control over something, you can police that a little bit better. Any other thoughts? Okay, well, those are some really good answers. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on that. So there are several reasons. So as some of you one of you alluded to, protecting the work means that other companies aren't just able to take it and protect it themselves, thereby blocking others from using it. We protect it to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to use the technology at a fair price, or at no price if we think that's appropriate. We will often give intellectual property to charities or other organizations at prices that don't really return a profit to us, because we think it is the best thing to do for the general good, if you will. And the second is that the research at the Sanger is funded by the Wellcome Trust, which is a charity. And even though it's a charity, we would like to ensure a fair return to the charity for the investment that it makes within the Institute. And so a fair return is not a gouging profit, but it is a fair return, especially if it's a commercial entity that will be making loads of money off of something that the charity has funded. Next, doing basic science and work on rare diseases, for example, is greatly underfunded. And the income from commercializing our discoveries often goes back into funding more science around those topics, which, as one of you also suggested. And then the last two are kind of related, but there's a recognition and motivation component, which I see somebody has also listed. And it's important for the inventors to receive recognition for their efforts, and often that's monetary. And if we were to get some return back for commercializing our intellectual property, a portion of that generally tends to go back to the inventors of that technology, which motivates them to continue innovating. And then last but not least, translating research from lab to application in the real world often takes significant amounts of additional time, investment, as well as skills that are not core areas that are Sanger's expertise necessarily, but are the expertise of industries like pharmaceutical companies and Protecting the IP creates a framework that allows the companies to profit from their investment, thereby incentivizing them to do it as well. Okay. So the floor is now yours. I've kind of listed 5 key things that I do in my day-to-day job to make sure a piece of research reaches something like a pharmaceutical company who would be able to use it to create a new drug, for example. So what is the first thing I would do? Would it be A, make sure the researcher publishes their work with great detail? Talk to the researcher early in their research process to understand what they are developing, or work with them in the lab to help them achieve their aims. If you could just put A, B, or C in the chat, that would be great. That is correct. It is B. I would talk to the researchers very early in the process to understand what they're developing. So next, do you think I would A, research the market to see if it's a technology that is new and covers an unmet need, assess the viability or maturity of the technology, or would I start by protecting the technology? Again, if you could just put your answers in the chat, A, B, or C. That is correct. It is A. I would research the market to see if the technology was something that would be valued if put out there. So once that's done, would the next step be to A, assess the maturity of the technology, B, start protecting the technology right away, or C, talk to the supervisor of the postdoc or PhD student that has developed the tech to shift the scope of their research entirely if it isn't a potentially commercialized project? Again, A, B, or C. So this is a tricky one, and I've seen both B and A. Normally, I would start by assessing the maturity of the technology to determine if it's the right time to start, protecting the IP. Often you want the technology to be at a stage. It is a tough question. It is a tough question. But generally, I would make sure that we think the technology is mature enough to where somebody else could take it on. And if not, because it might be the case that further development might be needed before we can take on the next step. So that's A. And then next, would I start talking to industry to see if they're interested in the technology, protect the technology via patent, or help the researcher find funding to continue with their research? Again, if you could put your answers in the chat, A, B, or C. So there's a lot of C's, but I will say that it's actually B, which is the last answer that was given. And that's because really, we want to be able to freely discuss the technology with people that might be interested. And the best way to do that is to make sure that we have it protected with a patent. And once that patent is in place, then it means that, you have first rights to it effectively. All right. And then finally, once all that is done, would I next talk to industry to see if they're interested in the technology, help them find funding to continue with their research, or make sure to keep the technology within the institute so that we are the only ones that benefit from it? Okay, so I've gotten a couple B's. But I will say that it would be I would start to discuss the technology more widely with people like industry partners to see if there's a genuine interest in it. And that kind of helps you gauge what your market would be like, what else would be needed to be done to get it out there, etc. So, and you know, I think the diversity of like answers or the difficulty in choosing between the two kind of indicates that it's not always a black and white process. This is how I would generally do things, but I do often make judgment calls at the time. So maybe in some cases, I will end up using somebody that I know in a pharma company as a sounding board to see if they would be interested in something before we decide to protect it. It really depends, but what I've listed here is the general order in which I would do things. Thanks for that, everyone. All right, I think I pressed the button, but maybe. Okay. So now I want to put a fairly relevant example in front of you. So I imagine that a lot of people here, many of you potentially have had a coronavirus vaccine. Most of you will probably know that there are COVID-19 vaccines available on the market now that, you know, we've all been encouraged to take. And for younger people, such as yourselves, you will almost surely have received an RNA-based vaccine if you got one. And so the picture I wanted to put up here was to start to get you thinking about how complicated it can be to get something like a vaccine out into the market. Really, because there's so many different components that go into making a vaccine. For example, the RNA sequence used in the vaccine, the lipid envelope used to package the vaccine, the way that it's delivered, amongst other things. And so over here, I've shown you a diagram of the general IP landscape around the RNA-based vaccine created by Moderna. And whoever was responsible for getting this out into the market had to make sure that they had all of the different pieces of IP that fed into getting this vaccine ready to put into arms sorted. And so everybody had to be compensated that needed to be compensated. All of the various license agreements needed to be put in place. All of the patents had to be filed. And this is generally what I do on a day-to-day basis. So I'll take a piece of technology and I'll break it down into its various components and make sure that I know for each component where it comes from, who is responsible for producing it. And then, you know, you can use that to determine who you need to speak to get permission to be able to use that technology. And then I wanted to leave you with some examples from the Sanger Institute of companies that programs that we've spun out in recent years that have come from the science developed here at the Sanger. The first is Congenica, and you can read what I've written there, but Congenica arose because of an academic program here at the Sanger, actually, that focused on sequencing whole genomes from children that had rare developmental disorders and did not know what was causing those disorders. And so this particular academic program was able to identify the genes that cause these developmental disorders and was able to provide these families with a diagnosis, essentially, that they didn't have before. Once that academic program ended, Congenica was spun out to continue this work at a larger scale, and it is now the exclusive clinical decision support partner for the NHS Genomic Medicine Service. Next, we have Kymab, which is Wellcome Sanger Institute's first ever spin out. And it was recently acquired by Sanofi in 2021, and it's focused on therapeutics designed to modulate the immune system to overcome cancer immune tolerance. And then we also have Cosmic, which kind of functions as a Google for the mutations that end up driving various cancers. And then we also have a program that was, really originated in the Sanger that helps to monitor the emergence of different strains of malaria that might be more resistant to drugs in various hotspots of the world for that disease. And having that information or staying on top of that information allows people that treat malaria to ensure that they tailor their treatments to be the most effective in light of the different strains that are present. So those are just a few examples of some of the science that has come out of this Sanger. And then over here, I've got some recommended reading links. I think that you will be given you'll be able to go back to the video and have these. But if it's easier, maybe Cindy or Fran, one of you could paste them in the chat. I'm not really sure if I can highlight from there, but yeah, so it allows you to just read a little bit more about technology transfer, and then also has a link to the article with the COVID-19 vaccine map that I showed you earlier. So with that, I can thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
So if there are any questions for Mariya, thank you so much for that chat. It was very interesting. Absolutely loved it. If anyone has any questions, can you put them in the chat and then we'll let Mariya answer them. Thank you.
I'll start with one. So if who are the beneficiaries? So say from a research project like Congenica goes to become a national service provider. Mm-hmm. So who the beneficiaries, obviously the patients and so on, but from a business point of view, do the scientists then get sort of is it a money? I don't make sound crass, but do they earn money from the translational process?
They do, and that can often happen in different ways. Some of the scientists will end up, often they'll end up consulting for companies that are taking the work forward because they've got the scientific knowledge to continue progressing the science within the company. The other thing we do, as I said, is go through all of the technologies and kind of figure out who contributed and figure out a percentage contribution, if you will, and then if the Sanger were to receive some sort of monetary compensation for this particular from this particular company because it's using its intellectual property, a portion of that would go back to the scientists that contributed to the invention, and it's based off of their particular contributions.
Brilliant. I mean, because genomics, because sequencing is getting so much cheaper and so on, are we going to start seeing a boom in the number of applications of sequencing technology becoming commercial and things like that?
I would like to think so. I think we're already seeing that. There's much more, the NHS has recently started to sequence whole genomes from cancer patients to have them on file, and I think one of the things that it's often a two-stage process. So discoveries from this field often happen when you have enough data to support those discoveries. So as the technology becomes cheaper, that will be done more and more often, producing the data that lets you make these discoveries. So yes, I do think that will be the case, but it's a balance between if the costs come down, you'll have more data to work with, and then somebody really has to know how to work with the data to get something useful out of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If that makes sense. Yeah. There's a question here. What is the most interesting project that I have worked on? So I'm not sure I'm allowed to share specifics of projects that I've been working on, that I'm currently working on, just because they've, you have to maintain a bit of confidentiality until they get out in the public domain. But the things that I like working on the most are generally ones that have to do with kind of the cutting edge of genomics technology, mostly single cell genomics technology, and what we can start to do with that. So you can start to really see like individual cells that and what they might be doing in the context of a particular disease where that information really wasn't available before, and often they're really rare cell types that you weren't able to see before. So I really like that science and that technology, and I find it quite fascinating. I think there's huge potential for it.
Do you miss being in the lab?
No, I don't actually. And I spent a lot of time in the lab, and I think I've learned the techniques, but when I was in the lab, I was quite focused on a single project. And I knew a lot about that project. Whereas now I cover the breadth of science at Sanger, which is, for me, a lot more interesting because it's much more varied and diverse. So no, I don't miss being in the lab anymore, just because if I was still in the lab, I wouldn't get to learn about all the various things going on in all of the departments here. Yeah, you're kind of siloed in the lab. Not to say that I didn't like being in the lab, but it's just different. Yeah.
How many different departments do you work with?
I work with all of the departments at the Sanger. So I work with I work with somebody in every program. So there's 5 different, I guess, programs at the Sanger. We've got the Tree of Life, which as I mentioned before, is sequencing all of the species of insects and animals and plants as well, potentially, in the United Kingdom. I work with the Cancer, Aging, and Somatic Mutations program. I work with cellular genetics, which is doing a lot of the single cell sequencing stuff that I was telling you about. I also work with certain programs in human genetics. And then I've also spoken to people that work in the parasites and genomics program as well, although it might be called something different now, but yes, yeah. So I work across the Sanger.
How many projects have you ever got on at one time?
I will say that I've got about 60 odd projects that are live. But I mean, it sounds like a lot, but really you're only working intensely on maybe, I don't know, 5 or so at a time. And then they kind of, settle down for a bit and you work on other things. And then you've kind of completed stuff for those. And then the other things pop back up. So it's not like I'm working on that many things all at once. And I mean, so I don't know if it's 60 odd projects or just like sort of 60 odd like things that I'm dealing with. Yeah.
Quite a lot. And do you have a favorite part of your job?
I think the initial discovery phase is when somebody comes to you with, hey, I've got this new novel technology, can I come talk to you about it? And maybe we can figure out if there's a way to I like that part the best, sort of the initial discovery around new technology.
Sounds very exciting.
Yeah.
What would be so we've got some from what I can look at the participant list, got quite a few young ladies here on the call. What would be your tips as a woman in science? Have you had to overcome challenges? What would be your advice for a young woman coming into the science field and how to progress through their career? Would you say, what would be your top tips?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
I love asking tough ones.
Let's see. I would say if you can, find yourself a mentor that has been on a similar journey potentially, or someone that you can speak to about the journey that you want to go on, or someone that's doing something that you're interested in, and speak to them. You know, I think it's important to have other women encouraging women in the field. And so if you can find a woman that can kind of do that for you, that's really important. Also, this is it might not seem like a big thing, but I grew up in a fairly patriarchal society. Not that, you know, my parents were patriarchal but, you know, I grew up in Saudi Arabia, which is a very conservative country in many ways. And so you're kind of taught as a woman, not intentionally maybe, but to sort of make yourself small or like apologize for things when you want stuff. And so I really had to find a way to sort of observe myself doing that and stop doing that. So when you write things like emails, I never say anymore, I just wanted to ask you this. I will say, I would like this information. Could you please give it to me? It's that sort of, it's that slightly apologetic tone that suggests that you're putting upon somebody to get something from them. And it's just not necessary. And people pick up on that and they don't take you as seriously anymore. So that's another thing that I think has helped me in the field. What else as a woman in the field? When you're applying for jobs, get somebody else to read your CV to make sure that you're not minimizing what you've done. I think it's really easy to not emphasize that because you think you're boasting, but that's not the case. And it's often more easily picked up by somebody else. So that would be another piece of advice.
We have a question in the chat about what has been the most challenging part of your career so far?
I think learning to deal with different personality types. Doing the role that I'm in, you know, most people are lovely, and but often you come across people that aren't as lovely, shall we say. And as a business development, as somebody who's trying to commercialize tech, you really have to be, a lot of my job is soft influence. And so you have to find a way of working with all types of people, whether or not you personally like them, but you have to find a way of working with them and making sure that they see you as a competent individual whose ideas and views are to be respected. And so it's learning to navigate, I guess, the landscape of different personalities that you will come across, because this job really does involve speaking to everyone. So not just the scientists, but like I said, the lawyers, the IP attorneys, the people sitting in boardrooms, all of it. And you have to learn how to keep your calm when you're not necessarily all that calm inside. You have to learn how to read a room properly, and just to, dealing with lots and lots of different types of people and dealing with them well.
Would you say that's then
challenging? Yeah.
Would you say that's then a skill that you have learned throughout all of your careers, regardless to what you've done, you've brought it across?
I think so. Yeah, I think this job involves, really good scientific knowledge and like knowledge of things like law. So it's sort of tangible knowledge, but doing lots of different things and dealing with lots of different people, not as a part of my career, but just throughout the course of my career has helped with this. Because even before I came into this role, I was coordinating various projects across the Institute, which involved dealing with various different types of people. So I think it's important, and maybe, I mean, not even just for this job, but I think it's important to like put yourself out there and just start talking to lots of different types of people, because that's really the only way you learn how to do that.
It's an important life skill, isn't it? Being able to talk to people from all different walks of life. I think it's quite a critical thing. And sometimes people can be very shy, but it's going out of your comfort zone and being able to put yourself out there. So the sooner you start doing it, I used to cringe when my mum talked to people in the supermarket, like just random strangers, but actually it's a really good thing because it puts you out of your comfort zone and you meet all sorts of different people. At the time I thought it was horrendous, but actually now my daughter's embarrassed because I do it. So, top tip there, talk to randoms at the supermarket if you feel comfortable doing so.
Exactly.
Very good. Let's have a look. How are we doing for time? I'll ask one more, possibly difficult question as well, but would you say who has been a role model for you? Did you have a particular role model in science or a role model growing up that's inspired you?
So I guess speaking of other women helping women, when I started this position, my direct supervisor at the time, I was quite nervous about starting this job, I will admit. It was a big change for me to go from being in the lab to having, and having zero business development experience to jumping into this role. And while the ad did say that you needed no business experience and they would teach it, it was still a really big jump. And when I moved into the position, my former supervisor in this role, Emmanuel, who I think you know as well, Fran, because we're on the same course together, was really, really great about teaching me the ropes and doing it in a way that built up my confidence. And she was also fantastic at the job that she did. So she, I learned a lot just from watching her. And so she was and is still a role model for me, for somebody in the position that I'm in.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think if you can learn from others around you, I think it's key, and always be open to learning as well, because you can never know everything, can you? It's again, and just take everything as a learning opportunity. And the other thing I will say is that you can learn from people that you may not admire everything about, everything that they do, but if they do something really well, take the opportunity to learn from them. People aren't generally like all excellent or all horrible. That's just not the way people work. But yeah, find people that do what you would like to do well, and see if you can figure out a way to talk to them to see how they got there. And yeah, I think that's really important. Yeah. Oh, but that's been so interesting, Mariya. Thank you so much. It's been really cool. This is the last call for questions. If there's anyone who's got a burning question to ask, this is your last chance to pop it in the chat or the Q&A section. I'll just check there's none in there. Oh, Zara's had a lovely comment there. Thank you. I've loved hearing about your job. This has helped me so much with my STEM award. Oh, that's lovely, Zara. Thank you. Oh, well, thanks, Zara. I'm glad that it was useful for you to hear. Yeah. So thank you so much. Yeah, I think we haven't got any more questions, have we, Cindy, from what I can tell?
No more questions, but we'll share the links on It's Learning as well that you've shown, Mariya.
Yeah, and we can pop them in. If anyone booked for Eventbrite, we can also put put it into the emails there as well. So thank you so much. It's just been fascinating for me to understand the process, and you just have such a cool job. It's just amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty great. I enjoy it quite a lot.
Fantastic. Well, we'll call that a night for tonight, but thank you everyone for joining the call, and thank you, Mariya, and we'll see you at the next speaker session. So thank you very much.